The knock came at the wrong hour. Not loud, not desperate. Just three slow taps, measured, patient like the night itself had learned manners. I was alone in the livery stable when it happened, sitting on a hay bale near the little iron stove, letting the warmth loosen the day out of my bones. The lantern beside me threw a soft circle of light onto the wooden floor, and beyond that circle, the stable stretched into shadow rows of stalls, tack on pegs, the quiet shapes of horses resting in the dark. A stable at night has its own kind of peace. You hear the smallest things: a horse shifting weight, straw whispering under hoof, a slow exhale that sounds almost like relief. The building settles now and then with a gentle creak, not from danger, but from age, wood remembering all the seasons it has held. Outside, the town was asleep, or pretending to be. I'd taken this watch because Ellis, the stable owner, asked me to, and because I needed a place where my mind could slow down without anyone looking at me like they expected answers. Ellis had said, "Keep the lantern low. Horses sleep better when the dark feels like it belongs to them." So I kept it low. I kept everything low. The stove glowed like a quiet ember, the kind of heat that doesn't demand attention. I'd fed it a small piece of wood earlier, just enough to hold back the cold. The cold still pressed against the boards, of course. It always does. But in seated, the stable was warm in the honest way: animal warmth, hay warmth, lantern warmth, simple and steady. Then the knock came again. 3 taps. Not the main door, the side door off the alley. I didn't move fast. I didn't speak. I just listened. The horses stayed calm. That mattered. If something dangerous stood outside, horses usually knew before people did. They'd stamp, they'd snort, they'd shift restlessly like the air had turned sharp, but they remained still, which meant whoever was outside wasn't a predator, not in the way a wolf is, not in the way a hungry man can be either, at least not loudly. I stood up slowly, the blanket sliding off my shoulders, and walked down the aisle with the lantern in my hand. The light swayed gently, making long shadows crawl along the stalls. I moved the way you move around sleeping things, careful, respectful. At stall 3, the gray gelding lifted his head and watched me with a calm eye. Old horse, scar on his shoulder turned white with time. He blinked once, slow, like he was reminding me, "Don't rush the night." "I'm not," I whispered, mostly to myself. At the side door, I stopped. I kept my hand near the latch, but didn't lift it. "Who is it?" I asked, voice low. A pause, then a man's voice, quiet and strained, as if it had been holding itself together for months. "Evenin'," he said. Another pause, like he wasn't sure if words were safe. I, I don't want trouble," he added. Trouble. That word shows up a lot in the West. Men carry it around like dust on their boots, even when they swear they never stepped in it. I kept my tone even. "Stables closed." "I know," the voice said. "I just need a minute. Just a minute out of the wind." I didn't open the door yet. The wind outside pushed softly along the alley, making the boards hum faintly. The voice didn't sound like a man playing a game. It sounded like a man losing one. "Name?" I asked. Another pause, then, "Caleb." I listened for a second voice, for movement behind him, for anything that felt like a trap. Nothing. The stable stayed quiet. The horses stayed calm. I unlatched the door and opened it a few inches. Cold air slipped in, clean and sharp. In the narrow slice of lantern light, I saw him. He stood hunched in the alley, hat in his hands, coat too thin for the hour. Not young, not old, just worn down. His cheeks were hollow. His eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He kept his hands visible. That was something. You alone? I asked. Yes, he said quickly. Yes, sir. He looked past me, not into my face, but into the stable toward warmth and stillness, like a thirsty man looking at water. Please, he said again, softer. Just a minute. I opened the door wider and stepped back. Slow, I told him. He nodded and slipped inside as if he didn't want to disturb the air. I closed the door gently behind him. The stable held the cold back like a patient wall. Caleb exhaled, long and shaky, as if his body had been waiting for permission to stop bracing. He stood there for a moment, eyes adjusting, shoulders easing in small increments. He didn't move toward the stalls. He didn't reach for anything. He just breathed. That alone told me a lot. Sit, I said, pointing toward an empty hay bale near the stove. Warm up. Caleb hesitated. I I can't pay. I didn't ask, I said. He swallowed hard and sat down, careful, like the hay might disappear if he trusted it too much. The stove glow painted his face in a soft orange, showing how tired he really was. He rubbed his hands together and stared at the flame. I ain't done nothing wrong, he said out of nowhere. That was either confession or fear. In the West, I replied quietly, wrong and broke get treated like the same thing. He closed his eyes for a second, like the truth hurt, but also helped, because at least it was named. I poured water from a small kettle and made the weakest coffee I could manage, not strong enough to wake the mind, just warm enough to settle it. I handed him the cup. He held it like it was a gift he didn't deserve. Thank you, he murmured. Drink, I said. Then breathe. Caleb sipped slowly. Steam rose, thin and gentle. For a while, the stable returned to its quiet rhythm. A horse snorted softly. Straw whispered. The old gray gelding shifted one hoof and settled again, as calm as stone. I thought the night might end right there. Just a man warming up, then leaving. But the West doesn't always let things stay simple. Because while Caleb warmed his hands, I noticed something near the door, something I hadn't seen before. A small shape in the shadows by the feed sacks. Not a cat. Smaller. Breathing. I lifted the lantern a little, and the light slid across the boards. It was a boy, no more than 10 or 11, thin as a fence post, cap pulled low, face smudged with dirt, like the road had claimed him. He was crouched there, trying to make himself smaller than the night. His eyes were midawopad, but he didn't run. He looked at me, and then at Caleb, like he was deciding which kind of danger was worse. I didn't step toward him. I kept my voice soft. You hungry? I asked. The boy didn't answer right away. He just watched, like kids do when the world has taught them words can be used against them. Then finally, he nodded once, not a yes that asked for pity, a yes that admitted truth. I took a piece of bread from the cloth-wrapped loaf near the stove and held it out. The boy came forward slowly, like a wary animal, and took it with both hands. He ate too fast at first, then forced himself to slow down, like he was afraid the food would vanish if he showed need. Caleb stared at him, something painful moving across his face. You, Caleb began, then stopped. The boy glanced up. You know me? He asked, suspicious. Caleb swallowed. I have seen you. In town. The boy's jaw tightened. Don't tell nobody. I won't, Caleb said quickly. I swear. I watched them both, feeling the stable's quiet tighten for a moment, like the night was listening. The boy sat down near the stove, still keeping a little distance, bread in hand. What's your name? I asked. He hesitated. Then, Tommy. Tommy, I repeated. I'm John. Caleb glanced at me, then said quietly, Caleb. The boy ate. The stove glowed. The horses breathed. And outside, far down the alley, the town made a new sound. Footsteps. Two sets. Slow, heavy. Not the sound of a man heading home. The boy froze. Caleb's hands clenched around his cup. The footsteps stopped near the side door, and then softly, like the night trying to be polite again, another knock. The knock came again, not hard enough to rattle the wood, just firm enough to say, We know you're in there. Tommy's whole body stiffened. The bread in his hands stopped moving. He didn't even chew. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, like the boards might turn transparent if he stared long enough. Caleb's face drained of what little color it had. He lowered his cup slowly, as if the sound of metal touching wood might give us away. I didn't rush to the door. I didn't whisper instructions like we were in the middle of a chase. I only lifted my hand palm down, asking for stillness. In a stable, stillness is a kind of language. The horses remained calm, and that steadied my nerves. They'd felt the footsteps. I knew they had. Yet they didn't spook. That meant the men outside weren't charging, weren't shouting, weren't trying to break anything. Still, a quiet man can cause trouble too. Tommy's voice came out like a thin thread. They looking for him, he whispered, eyes flicking toward Caleb. Caleb didn't answer. He looked down, jaw tight, like he was trying to swallow the fear before it showed. The knock came a third time. Then a voice low, rough, tired. Open up. Not Ellis's voice. Not anyone who belonged to the stable. I stepped toward the door slowly. The lantern in my hand threw long shadows across the aisle. I kept the flame low and my footsteps soft so the horses wouldn't shift into panic. I didn't unlatch the door yet. Stable's closed, I said through the wood, calm and even. A pause, then a small laugh, the kind that held no warmth. Closed? The voice repeated. That's funny. Another voice joined, slightly younger, still rough. We're just looking for a man. Won't take long. Tommy's fingers tightened on his bread. His knuckles went pale. Caleb's shoulders rose, like his body was preparing to run, even though he had nowhere to go. I kept my voice steady. You can look for him in the morning. The first voice lowered, turning sharper. We don't do mornings. I could picture them out there, men who liked the night because the night made people feel alone. Men who thought darkness gave them permission. I didn't give them anything to push against. If you're talking rent, I said, you can talk it with the owner when the sun's up. There was another pause, a shift of boots outside. Then the younger voice said, Owner ain't here. Ellis drinks at the saloon. That wasn't true. Ellis didn't drink much, and he didn't stay out late. But they were testing, seeing if I'd argue, if I'd stumble over details. I didn't. I don't know what Ellis does, I said. I know this door stays shut at night. A soft scrape outside. Maybe a hand running along the wood. Maybe a boot shifting closer. Then the first voice came again, closer than before. You got somebody in there? I didn't deny too quickly. Denying fast sounds like lying. I answered like a man who didn't owe explanations. I've got horses in here, I said, and they're sleepin'. Silence. And then, from behind me, a tiny sound Tommy's stomach, a small, hungry growl he couldn't control. It wasn't loud, but in the kind of silence we were holding, it felt like thunder. Caleb's eyes went wide. Tommy froze harder, as if he could swallow the sound back down. Outside, the younger voice chuckled. What was that? He said. The older one said, You hear that? There's someone in there. For a moment, the stable felt too quiet, like the walls were listening as hard as I was. I didn't turn around. I didn't look at Tommy. I kept my gaze on the door and used the most valuable tool a tired man has. Patience. Wind in the boards, I said simply. The younger voice laughed again. Win don't sound like a kid. That line made Tommy's breathing go shallow. The older voice came in, low and confident. Open the door, he said, or we'll open it for you. That was the point where the night usually breaks, where a man either fights or folds. But sometimes there's a third way. Sometimes you don't fight the storm. You make the storm feel like it's wasting time. I leaned closer to the wood and spoke slowly, like I had all the hours in the world. This stable belongs to Ellis, I said. Ellis has a shotgun, and Ellis has a temper when he's woken up. Caleb stared at me like I was crazy. Tommy's eyes were huge. I continued, calm and measured. If you want to stand out there and explain to him why you're banging on his door after midnight, be my guest. Silence again. I could almost hear them deciding. Then the younger voice muttered, Ain't worth it. The older one stayed quiet a second longer, stubborn as a mule. Then he said, We'll be back. And footsteps began to retreat slow at first, then fading into the alley. Only when the sound was gone did I let myself breathe out. Tommy's shoulders dropped in a shaky release. Caleb's hands trembled as he picked up his cup again. You lied, Tommy whispered, half accusation, half awe. I crouched a little, keeping my voice soft. I protected the night, I said. Tommy didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. He chewed his bread again, smaller bites now, trying to calm his body. Caleb finally spoke, voice cracking. They're from my landlord, he admitted. He sends men when you're behind. They don't care if you're sick or you lost work. They just take. Tommy swallowed hard. They took my ma's ring, he whispered. Caleb's face tightened. I felt the stable grow heavier with old pain that didn't shout, pain that just sat down beside you. I walked back to the stove, fed it one small piece of wood, and watched the flame catch. It didn't flare. It only glowed. That's the thing about fire, I said quietly, mostly to myself. You don't have to make it big to make it warm. Tommy stared at the stove, eyes glossy. Caleb rubbed his face. For a while, we sat in the hush, letting the stable's simple sounds carry us. The slow breathing of horses, the soft shift of straw, the patient crackle of the stove. Tommy's head began to droop again. He fought it once, then twice. But warmth is persuasive, and fear, even strong fear, can only hold a child upright for so long. He leaned back against the wall and drifted into sleep again, his fingers still curled around the last piece of bread. Caleb watched him, something tender and painful in his eyes. I don't know how he does it, Caleb whispered. Kids learn to sleep anywhere, I said softly, because if they don't survive. Caleb looked down at his cup. I used to think, he said, if I just worked hard enough, life would get easier. I kept my voice low. Hard work keeps you moving. It doesn't always keep the world fair. Caleb nodded, like he'd known that for a long time, but needed someone else to say it. Outside, the wind shifted again. Inside, the stable held steady, and in that steady quiet, a new thought settled in my mind, clear and simple. The men outside would come back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Because men who hunt debts don't stop hunting just because the door stayed shut. Caleb needed more than warmth. Tommy needed more than one safe night. The stable had given them a pause. Now the question was, could it give them a morning? I stared at the lantern glow, thinking of Ellis, thinking of the town, thinking of what it costs to belong anywhere in the West. Then, from somewhere in the dark stalls, the old gray gelding let out a slow breath. Deep, steady like. He was reminding me the night wasn't finished teaching yet. I stood again, careful not to wake Tommy, and walked down the aisle toward the office corner where Ellis kept his ledger. On the desk, under a small weight, lay a folded paper, Ellis's work notes, names and amounts, the quiet record of who owed what and who had paid. I wasn't looking to steal. I was looking for one thing, a name. Because if Caleb's landlord was sending men into alleys after midnight, I wanted to know which kind of man we were dealing with when daylight came. I lifted the paper just enough to read, and there it was, a name I recognized. Not from friendship, from warning. My stomach tightened, because that meant the knock at the stable door wasn't just about rent. It was about power, and power out here always wants to be seen. I put the paper back exactly where it had been, like I'd never touched it. Then I sat down by the stove again, letting the night stay quiet, even as my mind moved. Caleb looked at me, reading my face. What? He whispered. I didn't scare him with details. Not yet. I answered with the truth that mattered most for the next few hours. Get some rest, I said softly. Morning's going to ask questions. Caleb swallowed, then nodded. He leaned back on the hay bale, still tense, but trying. The stove glowed. The horses breathed. Tommy slept. And the stable old wood, warm hay, quiet animals, held us in its calm, while somewhere outside, the town waited for daylight to start being hard again. The stable stayed quiet, but it wasn't empty of meaning. That's the strange thing about nights like this. Everything looks calm, and yet the air feels like it's holding a question just out of sight. Caleb tried to rest on the hay bale. He leaned back, eyes half closed, but sleep didn't take him the way it took Tommy. Every few minutes, his gaze drifted to the door, as if he expected it to open on its own. Tommy slept again, small chest rising and falling, his face soft now in the stove's warmth. Even in sleep, his hand kept a careful grip on the edge of his coat, like he needed proof he still had something. I fed the stove another small piece of wood, just enough to keep the glow alive. It crackled once, and then settled. The horses were quiet too. Most of them had their heads low, resting. A few blinked slowly in the shadows, calm and steady. The old gray gelding watched the aisle like he'd been built for patience. Outside, the town made its night sounds, faint, distant, harmless. A sign creaking, a wagon wheel shifting in the wind, something small scurrying across a porch. And then, slowly, the night began to thin. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a subtle shift, like the darkness was loosening its grip. Dawn was coming. That's when the stable door clicked. Not the side door, the main door. A careful click, like a key turning, like someone who belonged. I stood, instinct smooth and quiet. I didn't grab anything. I didn't lunge. I just stepped into the aisle and held the lantern low. The door opened, and a familiar shape entered with the cold morning air. Ellis. He stepped inside with the kind of calm that comes from living too long in one place to be surprised by much. He was wrapped in a heavy coat, hat low, face lined by years and weather. He smelled faintly of smoke and coffee. His eyes scanned the stable. They moved from the horses to the stove, then to me, then to Caleb, then to Tommy, asleep near the warmth. Ellis didn't speak right away. He just stood there a moment, like he was reading the room with the same patience he used to read a horse. Then he said, in that quiet voice that never wasted words, "Night got busy." "A little," I replied. Ellis walked down the aisle slowly, checking latches with his horse, like he always did, touching each stall door as if the wood could tell him a story. When he reached the stove corner again, he nodded once at the small fire. "You kept it low," he said. "Like you said." Ellis grunted. Not quite approval, not quite anything else. Then he looked at Caleb again. Caleb sat up straighter, hands visible, eyes tired but honest. "You got a reason to be here?" Ellis asked. Caleb swallowed. "Yes, sir, I didn't mean trouble. I just, I had nowhere warm." Ellis studied him for a long moment. Not cruel, just careful. Then Ellis glanced at Tommy. The boy didn't wake, but he shifted slightly, pulled his coat tighter as if the morning chill had reached him even through the walls. Ellis's face softened a fraction. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to matter. "Boy's been sleeping outside again," Ellis said, more statement than question. Tommy stirred at the sound of the word boy. His eyes opened slowly. He blinked in the lantern light, and then noticed Ellis. His posture changed instantly. Guard up, pride up, chin slightly lifted. Ellis held his gaze. Tommy's voice came out rough from sleep. "Ain't your business." Ellis didn't argue. He didn't scold. He just nodded like he respected the boy's pride, even if it was sharp and stubborn. Then Ellis looked back at me. "Who are they?" he asked. "Tommy," I said. "Caleb." Ellis's eyes flicked to Caleb. "That name ain't new around here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I worked the rail spur when they got work." Ellis didn't say anything for a moment. He stepped past us to the office desk and opened his ledger, flipping pages as if it was the most normal thing in the world. but I could tell he already knew what he was looking for. He stopped on a page and tapped it with one finger. Landlord, Ellis said, not looking up. Caleb's throat moved. He nodded once. Ellis finally raised his eyes. Men came looking for you? Caleb hesitated, then answered, quiet. Yes, sir. Ellis exhaled through his nose, like he was tired of the same story repeating in the same town. They came here? Ellis asked. I nodded. Ellis's gaze sharpened. You opened my door? No, I said. Ellis looked relieved in a way he'd never admit. Then he said, Good, because I don't like strangers thinking they can bang on my stable after midnight. Tommy watched Ellis carefully, trying to decide if this man was safe or dangerous. Kids like Tommy measure safety in tone, not promises. Ellis closed the ledger with a soft thump. Then he said something that surprised Caleb so much he blinked like he'd misheard. I need a hand, Ellis said. Caleb's voice cracked a little. Sir? Muck and stalls, Ellis continued. Haul and feed, clean and tack, work's work. Caleb stared. You mean here? Ellis nodded once. For a day, maybe more. Depends if you show up like you say you will. Caleb's eyes filled too fast. He looked down quickly, embarrassed by the emotion. Yes, he said, too quick. Yes, sir, I'll show. Ellis's gaze shifted to Tommy. And you, Ellis said. You can sweep, carry water, small work. Tommy's shoulders stiffened. I ain't working for you. Ellis didn't flinch. Then you ain't eating my food. Tommy's jaw tightened. But hunger is a stronger argument than pride. Ellis kept talking, calm as a fence post. You can sleep in the loft, Ellis said. Warm, dry. You don't have to run in the dark. Tommy swallowed. His eyes flicked toward the stalls, toward the horses, toward the stove, toward the simple warmth he'd tasted for the first time in a long while. You ain't my pa, Tommy muttered, voice small but sharp. Ellis nodded, like he accepted that truth without pain. No, Ellis said. I'm not. I'm just tired of seeing kids freeze. Tommy didn't answer immediately. Then, almost invisibly, he nodded once. It wasn't surrender. It was agreement. Ellis turned away and walked toward the supply shelves as if the matter was settled and no further kindness needed to be spoken out loud. That's how men like Ellis do it. They hide mercy inside routine, because mercy is easier to give when you pretend it's just business. Caleb sat there, shaking slightly, not from cold anymore. Something else. Tommy looked confused and suspicious and hopeful all at once. I watched them both and felt the stable's quiet change. It wasn't just warm anymore. It was holding. Outside, the morning brightened. The town began to wake up in layers. A broom sweeping a porch, a pot clanking, a distant cough, a horse neighing somewhere down the street. Ellis walked back to the office and said, without looking up, You stayin'? He meant me. I shrugged. For a bit. Ellis nodded once, like that was fine. Caleb stood and cleared his throat. Those men, they might come back, he said carefully. Ellis finally looked up, eyes steady. They come here again, Ellis said. They'll find me awake. Caleb's shoulders loosened like a rope being untied. Tommy watched Ellis like he'd never seen a grown man stand like that, quiet but unmovable. The morning light grew stronger. The lantern flame looked pale next to it. I turned the lantern down and let the stable breathe into day. Ellis tossed Caleb a shovel. "Start with stall 5, he said. Caleb caught it like it was heavier than metal, like it was a chance. Ellis handed Tommy a broom. "Sweep slow," he said. "Don't raise dust." Tommy took it reluctantly. Then, after a moment, he started moving the broom in short, careful strokes. It was clumsy at first, then less clumsy. The stable filled with the gentle sounds of work. Straw shifting, broom bristles dragging, water pouring. Work can be calming when it's honest and small. The horses watched, calm, accepting. The gray gelding blinked slowly, and for the first time all night, the fear in the air loosened its grip, because fear is loud, and this morning was quiet. Still, I knew something. Men like that landlord didn't like losing control, and if his name was the one I'd seen in Ellis's ledger, then this wasn't just about Caleb's debt. It was about making sure everyone in town remembered who held power, which meant the day might ask more of the stable than it had asked of the night. But for now, in the soft morning light, with warm hay underfoot and horses breathing steadily, there was something close to peace. And sometimes, peace isn't permanent. Sometimes, peace is just a place you stand for a while, long enough to remember what it feels like to be safe. By late morning, the stable smelled cleaner. Not new, nothing in the West ever feels new for long, but cleaner in the way a swept floor feels calmer, even if dust will return. The stalls had fresh straw. The trough was full. The tack wall looked neater, saddles hanging like quiet promises, bridles looped with care. Caleb worked without complaint. The shovel moved in steady rhythm lift. Turn, settle like he was trying to prove something without needing to speak it. Tommy swept with the seriousness of someone who didn't want his chance taken away. His strokes weren't perfect. He left uneven lines. But he kept going, and that mattered more than perfection. Ellis watched them the way he watched horses, without fuss, without praise, just making sure the work stayed honest. And I stayed near the aisle, not in charge, not important, just present. A stable is a strange place to learn about people. Horses don't care what a man says. They care what he does. And when you spend time in a stable, you start learning the same way. Caleb didn't talk much, but his shoulders slowly relaxed as the hours passed. His hands stopped shaking. His breath stopped catching in his throat every time someone walked outside. Tommy kept glancing at the door, still half expecting the night to come back early. But the morning light held steady, soft and pale, sliding through the cracks in the boards like it was trying to comfort the place. Then, just past noon, the town reminded us that peace never lasts forever without being tested. A shadow fell across the main doorway. 2 men stepped inside. They weren't the same men from the night before, but they wore the same kind of confidence, the kind that comes from believing the town belongs to you. They didn't look at the horses. They didn't look at the tack. They looked straight at Caleb. Tommy froze, broom in his hands. Caleb's face tightened, like someone had pulled a rope around his chest. Ellis didn't move quickly. He didn't reach for anything. He just stepped forward into the aisle, calm as a fence post, and placed himself between the men and the work. His voice was quiet. "Mornin'," Ellis said. The taller man glanced around, like he was checking if anyone was watching. "We're looking for Caleb," he said, as if saying a name made it his. Ellis's eyes didn't change. "He's working," Ellis replied. The man smiled without warmth. "That don't change what he owes." Ellis nodded once. "Ain't saying it does." The second man stepped forward a half pace. His boots were too clean for honest labor. "Then you won't mind us taking him," he said. Ellis's tone stayed steady. "I do mind." The taller man gave a slow, offended laugh. "You mind?" Ellis lifted his chin slightly. "This is my stable. Men don't get dragged out of my stable like livestock." That word livestock made Tommy grip the broom tighter. The taller man's smile thinned. "You're getting sentimental, Ellis." Ellis didn't blink. "I'm getting tired." That word again. Tired. It sounded like nothing, but it carried weight, because tired meant stop being impressed by threats. The taller man's gaze slid past Ellis toward Caleb. "You think shoveling straw pays a debt?" he asked. Caleb swallowed, but Ellis answered before Caleb had to. "He'll pay," Ellis said. "Not in one day, not with miracles, but he'll pay by showing up, same as the rest of us." The second man scoffed. "Our boss don't accept showing up. He accepts money." Ellis nodded slowly, as if agreeing with something that had always been true. "Your boss," Ellis said, "accepts fear. That's what he really collects." The men stiffened. Not angry yet, just surprised someone said it out loud. The taller man took a step closer, voice lowering. "You should be careful, Ellis." Ellis didn't step back. "I am careful," he said. "That's why I keep my doors locked at night." The taller man's eyes narrowed, remembering. "You had someone talking big behind this door," he said. Ellis's voice stayed calm. "Maybe you should sort of listened." Silence stretched. In that silence, the stable felt huge, like the rows of stalls, the hanging tack, the warm smell of hay. All of it was standing with Ellis. Horses shifted softly, not spooked, just aware. And then something small happened. Tommy, still frozen, took one tiny step toward Ellis. Not bold, not dramatic, just a child placing himself nearer to the only wall he believed in. Ellis noticed. His expression didn't change, but his stance grew even steadier. The taller man saw it too. His mouth curled. "So now you're playing hero for a street rat," he muttered. Ellis's voice turned colder. Not louder, just colder. "Don't talk about kids like that in my stable," Ellis said. The second man's gaze flicked to the tack wall saddles, bridles, straps, and then back to Ellis as if he was measuring what kind of trouble he'd have if he pushed. That's the thing about quiet courage. It doesn't look like much, but it forces other men to calculate. The taller man sighed, like this was all inconvenient. "Fine," he said. "We'll talk business, like civilized men." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out, like proof was more important than truth. "Caleb owes," he said. "The boss wants payment today." Ellis didn't take the paper. He didn't even look at it right away. Instead, he said, "Caleb's working for me today, and if your boss wants payment, he can come speak to me." The taller man laughed again. "You?" Ellis nodded once. "Me." The laughter died, because it wasn't funny anymore. Not with Ellis standing like stone in the stable full of witnesses that didn't gossip, just watched. The taller man lowered the paper. "You're making yourself a target," he warned. Ellis shrugged slightly. "Wouldn't be the first time." Then Ellis said something that didn't sound like a threat, but landed like one. This stable feeds half the town's horses, he said. You make trouble here. You make trouble with the people who need those horses. It was true, and men who profit from fear don't like trouble that costs them money. The taller man stared at Ellis for a long moment. Then he took a step back, as if the stable floor had grown heavier. All right, he said slowly. We'll tell the boss. Ellis nodded. Tell him I'm here. The men turned and left. No fight, no shouting. Just two men realizing the stable wasn't the easy place they thought it was. When they were gone, the air stayed still for a moment, like the building needed time to believe it. Caleb's breath came out in a shaky rush. Tommy's shoulders dropped. Ellis didn't look proud. He didn't look pleased. He just looked practical. He turned to Caleb. Keep working, Ellis said. Caleb nodded quickly and went back to his stall, like work was the only way to keep his fear from returning. Ellis looked down at Tommy. Tommy stared up, eyes wide. Ellis didn't pat his head, didn't soften his voice too much. He only said, Sweep slow. Tommy nodded and swept. Slower now, calmer, like his body finally believed it might be safe to breathe. I watched all of them and felt something settle deep in my chest. Not victory, not pride, just relief. Because the West didn't give you many gentle endings, but sometimes it gave you a small one. Evening returns, quiet again. By late afternoon, the light changed. Sun slanted through the boards, turning dust into gold. The horses breathed in warm, slow rhythms. The stable looked almost peaceful enough to belong in a memory. Ellis brought out bread and a little cheese, setting it on the office desk without ceremony. Caleb ate like a man who hadn't eaten properly in days, still careful, still embarrassed by his need, but finally not starving. Tommy ate slower than he had at night, chewing like he was learning how to be calm around food. The cat returned from wherever cats go and rubbed against the stove leg as if checking that comfort hadn't left. And for a moment, the stable felt like the softest kind of home one built from routine and quiet responsibility. As dusk came, Ellis opened the loft hatch and pointed upward. Your spot, he told Tommy. Tommy hesitated at the ladder. Then he climbed, each rung careful, each step unsure. When he reached the loft, he looked down at us like he couldn't believe he was allowed to be above the ground, away from the cold. Ellis tossed up a folded blanket. Tommy caught it, held it, then disappeared into the loft shadows like a child slipping into safety. Caleb stood near the office corner, holding his coat. Thank you, he said to Ellis, voice rough. Ellis didn't look up from his ledger. Show up tomorrow, Ellis said. That's thanks. Caleb nodded quickly. I will. He glanced at me, then like he needed one more truth before the day ended. You think they'll come again? He asked softly. I didn't give him false comfort. They might, I said. But now they know the door doesn't open easy. Caleb breathed out, slow. He left just after sunset, walking through the stable doors like a man who had somewhere to return to. Ellis watched him go, then turned to me. You leaving too? Ellis asked. I nodded. Yeah, roads still call. Ellis grunted. Roads always do. I stepped toward the gray gelding's stall and rested my hand on the top board one last time. The horse blinked slowly. Quiet did its work, I whispered. The gelding exhaled, deep and steady, like agreement. I turned back to Ellis. You did more than you'll admit, I said. Ellis looked at his ledger like it was the only thing in the world. I fed horses, he replied. That too, I said. I picked up my coat, adjusted it over my shoulders, and walked to the door. Outside, the town cooled under dusk. Inside, the stable held warmth. A boy lay in a loft under a blanket, listening to horses breathe. A man with tired eyes had work for tomorrow. An old owner pretended mercy was routine, and the midnight knock-what had felt like a threat had turned into something else, a door that stayed closed to the wrong kind of men and open just enough to the right kind of need. I stepped into the evening air and let it fill my lungs. Then I walked down the road at a slow pace, not rushing anything, letting the town fade behind me like a soft lamp turning down. The West was still the West, hard, wide, unforgiving. But behind me, in that livery stable, the night had proven one small thing. Sometimes peace is not a place you find forever. Sometimes peace is a door you keep shut against fear, and a quiet corner you keep warm for those who need it. And that was enough. The end.